Greetings, Acolytes of the Force, and welcome back to the channel. Our search for the truth behind the Grey Jedi continues, and today we bring to you an incredibly interesting character who might help up to continue on the path to discovering how the Grey Jedi operate within the Force itself. Our character analysis today will focus on Vergere, a woman who has spent part of her life both as a Jedi and a Sith at the same time, and is now a being with a rather curious stance and opinion on the Force. We first meet the character of Vergere in the New Jedi Order novels, when she teaches Jacen Solo to ultimately embrace the dark side, leading him on the path that will eventually lead to him becoming Darth Sidious. Not only did Vergere train Jacen for a time, but she also trained with Asherad Het, who would later become the being known as Darth Krayt. Although being a supporter of the dark side and an agent of the Sith, Vergere maintains a surprisingly obscure stance in the Force, and mostly pushes Jacen Solo towards embracing the real truth rather than simply the dark side. So today, we wanted to take a look at Vergere, analyze if she really is a Grey Jedi or not, and how she ultimately led to the creation of two of the most powerful Sith in the modern era. Starting out with her backstory, Vergere is a bird-like species known as a Fosh, who was a member of the Jedi Order pretty much since her hatching. Despite this, Vergere was a rogue student, secretly studying the sources outside of what was approved by the Jedi. It would be these studies of other rogue Jedi, including Count Dooku, that would actually lead her to Darth Sidious at some point in the timeline. At this point, Vergere actually became a student of the Sith Lord directly, being privy to Darth Sidious's direct teachings. This is where her story gets really interesting, as she was content with her training until finding out the very extent of Palpatine's plan to kill the Jedi. She attempted to carry out the rule of two by assassinating Palpatine, but of course she ultimately failed. I would like to point out that she was still very much a part of the Jedi Order, but simply in secret. Soon though, she would be sent out on a mission by the Council to investigate some attacks that happened on the planet in the unknown regions, where she would actually find and be captured by the race known as the Yuuzhan Vong. Going back slightly a little bit though, for her to still secretly be a Jedi while being directly apprenticed and leaning under Darth Sidious is exceptionally rare, meaning that she very much was attempting to be a master of both the Jedi as well as the Sith. However, after being captured by the Vong and seeing all of their incredibly powerful biotechnology, Vergere became afraid, realizing that the Galactic Republic and the Jedi were not prepared to fight such powerful creatures. In a moment of self-sacrifice, Vergere agreed to leave with the Vong if they would break off their attack. She had amazed and mystified the Vong with her powers in the Force, and told them that she was actually a kind of witch, hiding the fact that she was indeed a Jedi. The Vong eagerly agreed to her terms, and she basically just lived with them until 50 years later, and 50 years had passed in the timeline, when she would finally get back involved with the wider galaxy during the Vong invasion. Once Vergere was back out in the galaxy, she came across Asherad Het, who had been captured by the Vong himself. Vergere pushed him towards the dark side, and also discussed with him the future of the Sith. However, Vergere abandoned Het as he refused to follow Darth Bane's rule of two, but sought to recreate the Sith Order once again under a brand new rule, the rule of one. Afterwards, Vergere would decide to figure out a different continuation for the Sith, and by allying with the Lady Lumaya, the two decided to induct Jacen Solo into their order. Lady Lumaya essentially also being a student under Darth Sidious during the era of the Empire, but more of a Sith acolyte and assassin than a full-blown apprentice. The training with Jacen Solo was tough, and Vergere constantly switched between being a wiser mentor figure, a motherly figure, and his torturer. At this point in Vergere's story, I know what many of you are saying. Yes, she sounds very much like an outright dark side wielder. But just wait. The primary reason that we wanted to mention her as a Grey Jedi is because of her rather odd view of the Force. Vergere carried the opinion that the Force had neither good nor bad sides to it, but rather that each person had light and dark sides within themselves. One of her quotes to illustrate this goes as follows: "If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart? Light and dark are no more than nomenclature, words that described how little we understand what it means. What you call the dark side is the raw, unrestrained force itself. You call the dark side what you find when you give yourself over wholly to the Force. To be a Jedi is to control your passion, but Jedi control limits your power. Greatness requires the surrender of control. Passion that guides you is not walled away. leave your limits behind. If your surrender leads to slaughter, this is not because the Force has darkness in it. It is because you do. The only dark side you need fear is the one within your own heart. The various lessons that Vergere teaches Jacen during their time together begins to illustrate the point that I think Kyle Katarn was also trying to make. However, Vergere seems to take this to a radical step further by insinuating that everything the Jedi say about the Force is a lie, and she criticizes them for their views. Here is one more quote to solidify her stance. "This is the shameful secret of the Jedi. There is no dark side. The Force is one. The Force is everything, and everything is the Force. The Force does not take sides. The Force does not even have sides." While this quote is very obviously wrong, just based on everything we know about the Force itself, it's interesting to see this perspective being taken by someone outside of Kyle Katarn himself. Kyle Katarn, who was one of the most powerful and famous Jedi of Luke Skywalker's era. This has to be one of the best examples of what a gray Jedi, or someone who is completely neutral in the Force, would strive to achieve, with Vergere and Kyle Katarn being cut from the same path, but one idolizing and going with the Sith and the other with the Jedi, but both ultimately being gray in nature. The only kink in all of this process is the fact that we have a difficult time really calling her a gray Jedi because she very definitely allies herself mostly with the Sith, even though in the end she truly really isn't one. She could be described as a dark Jedi, but she seems to actually care more about the Order than herself. She also cares about the Republic and cares about the Jedi, as she sacrificed nearly 50 years of her life to prolong the date the Yuuzhan Vong would invade, as she knew the Republic and the Jedi wouldn't be able to stand a chance at the time, wanting to keep the Jedi and the Sith alive. We don't really get a very clear idea of how powerful Vergere really was though. We know she was quite competent with a lightsaber and could use the Sever Force ability, which automatically places her on at least Jedi Master levels, having been trained as both a Jedi Consular and a Sith by Sidious himself. Vergere could quite possibly be a very formidable opponent in her prime. Vergere would actually end up showing major regret at torturing Jacen Solo later on, and she would end up sacrificing herself to turn the tide of the battle against the Vong. In the end, Vergere turned out to be a person with pure intention, but an incredibly strange view of the Force. I want to know your thoughts personally on her though, and how would you classify Vergere? She is clearly not a Jedi, but perhaps because she is an independent who ebbs more to the dark side, she could be considered a dark Jedi. Or perhaps since she allies with the Sith and pushes for the rule of two to continue, she could be classified as a Sith perhaps? Or due to her complete rejection of the notion of the light and dark within the Force, maybe she is indeed a gray Jedi after all. We will leave this up to you and your deliberation down below, acolytes. And until next time, may the Force be with you and have a great day.